Welcome back to the Run for a Million. We're in the Curt News studio with one of the great, and I do mean that, great artists playing the Run for a Million this year. Stephen Wilson Jr., all the way from Indiana. Stephen, that's where you grew up.
Sir. Yes, sir.
What brings you here?
Well, I'm here to play for the Run for a Million, and it's great to be in Vegas. Being a Southern Indiana boy, this feels like I'm on a different planet. So.
I'm telling you, your career arc kind of fascinates me, and here's why. I was a guy that worked in radio for a while.
Yeah.
And you grew up in a rural area like most of us did, so the musical influences aren't very diverse. With the corporatization of radio, how'd you find your spot? Like, how did you find the music? You know, it's a little hard to describe what you do. I've heard it described as part country, part grunge. Where's that sound come from? I know it's a big question, but talk to us a little bit about how you developed your sound.
Well, I grew up listening to country music. That's kind of was my first introduction to music was Johnny Cash and George Jones and Hank Sr. And then a lot of 90s country kind of came in to the frame. So that's kind of, that was always the background of my life. And John Mellencamp, being from Seymour, Indiana, Mellencamp was pretty much painting my town in his songs. And I was living in kind of one of his paintings, I felt like. So I kind of got to see music validated through life. And John was like, he had country and Americana and all rock and roll and all kind of influences that I was really influenced by. And then I would say a lot of classic rock. I grew up in a body shop and around farmers where it was like either country music or classic rock playing. So I really got into Zeppelin, and composers like Jimmy Page really influenced me a lot too. It kind of took you on these musical odysseys. And then I started playing guitar, and I started getting into bands like Soundgarden and Nirvana, and then later evolved into like indie rock music like Death Cab for Cutie and The National and Not a Surf and all these bands. And so really like my rootsy country upbringing with a lot of John Mellencamp, Americana, later, evolving into like, grunge music and into indie music, it all like kind of culminated at one point into what I call Death Cab for Country now. But yeah, that's pretty much, I wouldn't say I found my sound. I more or less stumbled into it.
Now, you mentioned the 90s. Something happened musically in the 90s. I feel like that was kind of the last great awakening of popular music. You mentioned some of the grunge acts and some of the 90s country acts. You mentioned Soundgarden, what a seminal band they were. What was it about that period? The rise of the grunge sound, alt country, red dirt country, whatever you want to call it, really came to rise. Do you think it was just consumers got tired of what they were being fed and they found new music, or did new artists arise then? How do you kind of quantitate what happened in the 90s?
I think it was a reaction to me. And I feel like what was going on, people were, I think, being fed kind of a lot of sugar in commercial music. And I think at that point they were kind of like, you can only have so much cake. And then eventually you're like, man, I just want some potatoes with some salt in it. Or I want something like savory, I want something substantial. And I think that was kind of the recoil, the reaction to that. And I think it's kind of happening in a lot of ways now. There's been a lot of sugar in the commercialization of music. And I think people are looking for something substantial and something real and something that's kind of authentic. I think people are really sick of kind of life seems somewhat contrived right now because everybody's kind of living this kind of fantasy life through social media and stuff like that. So it's really hard for people to figure out what is real anymore. So I think if you can really give them something undeniably real, I mean, that's probably one of the most sought after commodities right now.
Well, and I think he touched on it. It seems like, and you mentioned Mr. Indiana, John Cougar Mellencamp. I remember when he was Johnny Cougar playing in Bloomington, Rain on the Scarecrow, Little Pink Houses. Like, these were songs that people you grew up with identified with because it was songs about them. And you kind of mentioned that when you credited John. How do you go about connecting with that audience and still just sing about your life experience?
Well, I mean, that audience is my family. That audience is like everybody I grew up with.
Sure.
So it's an easy audience for me, even though like sonically I may be a little bit different from what they're used to hearing in modern music. I feel like that's home to me. And I love playing in rock and roll clubs and rock and roll crowds, but like when I play in front of like blue collar country people, I feel like I'm at home. And whether my music feels like home to them, that's a different story. But I know I feel at home in front of them, and that's where I want to play music. So.
That's fantastic. If you could sit down, living or dead, one artist, see a show at their prime, who would you see? Who's Steven Wilson attracted to, just as a fan?
I would have loved to have seen Led Zeppelin at their prime. That would have been, I think, truly life-changing. I mean, 4 incredible musicians at their
classically trained musicians.
Absolutely, yeah.
At the height of their power.
John Bonham's one of my favorite drummers still to this day. I mean, watching Bonzo play, I think, would have been like the whole band, the synergy and everything. And Nirvana would be probably a close second, and Soundgarden maybe a close third. But
wow,
I never got to see any of those 3.
Steven Wilson, we're so thrilled to have you at Run for a Million. I know this is a little outside your comfort zone, but the horse community is thrilled that Taylor brings type artists like you. He has an eye for unsigned, independent artists. I know you're currently signed with Big Loud Records, so that's great. But he's always given a stage to artists that he feels like bring something to the artistic community and are going to have value for the listener. So we're thrilled you're here.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Taylor, for having me.
Look forward to seeing you gig. Steven Wilson Jr.